I have the great honor on behalf of the Nobel.
In December of 1964, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a hero draped in the honor of the Nobel Peace Prize, basked in the recognition at the award ceremony in Oslo, a shadow slithered into his life, poisonous and unwelcome.
I accept the Nobel Prize for Peace at a moment when 22 million Negroes of the United States are engaged in a creative battle to end the long night of racial injustice.
Back in the States, a package addressed to Dr. King, a silent serpent, arrived at his doorstep. Its contents, a venomous concoction designed to strike at the very heart of his triumphs. It wasn't until Dr. King returned, his heart brimming with hope for a more just future, that the letter was discovered. A tremor ran through Dr. King's hands as he unfolded the letter. His eyes darted across the page, every sentence a vicious jab. A yellowed, typewritten letter reeked of desperation. Clumsy attempts to correct typos and misspellings marked the page, written in the voice of a betrayed admirer. The recipient, once a respected figure, was now a colossal fraud, leading a life of evilness. The letter spewed accusations of sexual orgies and immoral conduct, threatening to expose these filthy acts to the nation within 34 days. The letter carried a chilling message: your end is approaching. There is only one thing left for you to do, the author warns vaguely in the final paragraph. You know what it is. Dr. King knew what it was: to kill himself.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
The sun dipped below the Memphis skyline on April 4th, 1968. Anticipation crackled in the air like static. At around 6:01 p.m., Martin Luther King Jr. stepped out onto the Lorraine Motel balcony as he prepared to lead a rally in support of striking sanitation workers, a cause close to his heart, a fight for dignity. Then, a deafening crack. The world held its breath. Dr. King crumpled, a single bullet severing the song of freedom on his lips. Chaos erupted. Dr. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, sadly pronounced dead shortly after arrival.
Some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
I would like to take this opportunity to ask Reverend John Genzel, who is the jazz minister, to lead all of us in prayer for Martin Luther King and the future of all civil rights movements. Would you please rise?
The news of his assassination sent America into a state of mourning and outrage. Cities across the country erupted in riots, a testament to the deep pain and anger his death ignited. The dream, the voice of a generation, silenced by a cowardly act. Tears welled, a tide of disbelief and despair. A nation in mourning couldn't fathom the loss. Dr. King, the man who dared to dream of equality, stolen by a bullet. From the bustling streets of Harlem to the quiet neighborhoods of Los Angeles, a collective cry of anguish rose up, echoing the pain felt by millions. Tears flowed freely, hearts heavy with grief, as people grappled with the sudden loss of a hero. The weight of his absence settled heavy, a stark reminder of the unfinished fight. Grief was a thick fog rolling across the nation. But beneath the sorrow, a storm was brewing. Questions, sharp and angry, clawed their way to the surface. Who and why? Who could have perpetrated such a cowardly act? What motive could drive someone to silence the voice of justice and equality? Theories swirled, a whirlwind of accusations and finger-pointing. But amidst the chaos, a single, heavy truth settled like a stone in everyone's gut. The world had been robbed of a champion of peace. The investigation into Dr. King's assassination began immediately. A manhunt was launched, eventually leading to the arrest of James Earl Ray, a career criminal in London just 2 months later.
6,000 FBI agents, together with police from over 100 countries, have been looking for Ray in the 2 months that have elapsed since Dr. King's murder. And now the trail ends here at Cannon Row Police Station.
Ray admitted to the shooting, but later recanted his confession, fueling a wave of conspiracy theories. James Earl Ray was a career criminal with a long history of petty theft, armed robbery, and forgery. Born in 1928 in Alton, Illinois, Ray's life was marked by instability and a lack of opportunity. He dropped out of school early and drifted from place to place, committing crimes to survive. In 1968, Ray was on the run from prison after escaping from a Missouri penitentiary. He possessed a fake passport and was likely headed to South Africa when he ended up in Memphis, Tennessee, where Dr. King was leading the sanitation workers' strike. Ray's motives for assassinating Dr. King remain unclear. He never provided a fully convincing explanation, and there's no evidence of a direct connection between him and any known organizations opposed to the civil rights movement. Some theories suggest he was paid for the killing, while others believe he acted out of racial hatred. The official investigation concluded that Ray acted alone. After a manhunt that ended in London, Ray was extradited back to the United States and charged with Dr. King's assassination. In 1969, he pleaded guilty, likely to avoid a possible death sentence. Ray spent the rest of his life in prison, maintaining his innocence at times and recanting his confession. While James Earl Ray was convicted of Dr. King's assassination, doubts and conspiracy theories persist. The lack of a clear motive and the timing of the assassination, coinciding with Dr. King's growing influence, continued to spark speculation. In the shadowy alleys of conspiracy, whispers grew louder, painting a picture of intrigue and betrayal. Was it the act of a lone gunman, fueled by hatred and bigotry? Or was there a darker truth lurking beneath the surface, hidden from prying eyes? As investigators combed through evidence and eyewitness accounts, the truth seemed elusive, slipping through their fingers like grains of sand. The early 1950s in America pulsed with the frenetic energy of a boomtown. World War II had ended, leaving a nation eager to shed the darkness of the past. Suburbs mushroomed around cities, each a testament to the burgeoning middle class. Levittown, with its rows of identical, affordable homes, became a symbol of the era. Inside, washing machines hummed and television flickered to life. Hallmarks of a new consumerist dream. Shiny Fords and Chevrolets cruised down newly paved roads, emblems of a nation on the move. Factories roared back to life, churning out cars, appliances, and the building blocks of a resurgent America. Union membership was strong, securing decent wages and benefits for many white, working-class men. The GI Bill, a beacon of hope for returning veterans, fueled the economic engine further. Education, home ownership, and business opportunities blossomed under its benevolent light. Magazines and advertisements painted a rosy picture of the ideal family. A breadwinner father, a nurturing stay-at-home mother, and a gaggle of happy children. This idyllic image, however, masked a harsher reality. Beneath the polished veneer lurked deep inequalities. For African Americans, the American dream remained stubbornly out of reach. Segregation laws cast a long shadow, denying them access to quality housing, education, and good jobs. The Jim Crow South enforced a system of racial apartheid, while opportunities in the North were far from equal. Women, too, found themselves confined by societal expectations. Though many entered the workforce, they were relegated to lower-paying jobs and denied equal opportunities for advancement. America, in those years, crackled with a low-grade fever. Segregation in the Deep South wasn't a theory, it was a slap in the face every single day. The sun beat down mercilessly, mirroring the heat of a system designed to keep Black Americans down. Cities like Montgomery and Birmingham were living museums of inequality. Jim Crow wasn't a historical footnote, it was the law. Black people rode in the back of the bus, drank from different fountains, and went to crumbling schools. Their skin color was a scarlet letter, dictating opportunity and denying freedom. But even under the suffocating weight of oppression, whispers of change began to dance on the wind. In the hushed tones of church basements and the passionate speeches in community halls, seeds of resistance were taking root. From the pulpits of modest Baptist churches to the determined meetings of civil rights groups, a quiet storm was brewing. The fight for equality, for the simple dignity of being treated like a human being, was about to erupt. Alabama, December 1st, 1955. The air hung heavy, thick with the stifling heat and the simmering anger of a segregated city. Rosa Parks, a seamstress with quiet courage, boarded the bus, another ordinary day turning extraordinary. When the bus driver ordered her to give up her seat for a white passenger, a spark ignited within her. Refusal, a small word, a giant act of defiance. Her arrest was a match to tinder. The African American community, long burdened by injustice, roared. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a young preacher with a booming voice, stepped forward. The Montgomery bus boycott, a movement forged in the fires of Rosa's arrest, was born. Black Montgomery walked. They walked to work, to school, anywhere but onto those segregated buses. Their resolve was ironclad, despite the threats and the lost wages. This wasn't about a seat, it was about dignity, a simple human right denied for too long. Dr. King, guided by the principles of nonviolence, led the charge. The boycott became a symphony of protest songs and peaceful marches, echoing Gandhi's call for justice. For 381 long days, they walked, sang, and demanded change. Their unwavering spirit resonated across America, sparking similar protests in distant cities. Finally, on December 20th, 1956, a landmark victory. The Supreme Court declared segregated seating unconstitutional. The buses would no longer be color-coded cages. Montgomery had spoken, and America had listened. The Montgomery bus boycott wasn't just about buses. It was a turning point. It showed the power of collective action, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unstoppable tide of justice. Segregation wasn't a distant concept for young Martin Luther King Jr. It was the air he breathed. Born into a world where racism cast a long shadow, he learned its sting early, but within him, a spark of resilience flickered, fueled by the love and wisdom of his family. Each day wasn't just a lived experience, it was a seed planted, a seed of determination, a yearning for justice. He wouldn't accept the status quo, this segregated reality. In his young heart, a dream began to take root, a dream of a future bathed in equality, where skin color wouldn't dictate your destiny. This wasn't some far-off fantasy. It was a burning ember, a promise he would carry with him, a fire that would eventually illuminate the path for a nation. The civil rights movement needed a voice, a soul to lead it forward. Enter Martin Luther King Jr., rising from the Montgomery bus boycott like a prophet of equality. His unwavering commitment to justice wasn't about violence, but about a radical act: love. Nonviolent resistance, his clarion call, echoed across the nation.
Send out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Dr. King wasn't just a strategist, he was a bard. His speeches weren't pronouncements, but poems etched in the hearts of millions. They galvanized a nation to action, to stand shoulder to shoulder for a future where skin color wouldn't dictate your destiny. His belief wasn't in fists, but in the transformative power of love and compassion. In a world spewing hate, Dr. King offered an antidote, a belief that humanity, at its core, craved kindness. This unwavering faith inspired a generation to rise up, to stare down oppression and dream of a society where everyone had a seat at the table. Dr. King's leadership wasn't a singular act, it was a revolution. He transformed not just the civil rights movement, but the very soul of America. His legacy? A testament to courage, resilience, and the unwavering belief that even the deepest darkness can't extinguish the flame of hope. It was September 20th, 1958, in Harlem, New York City. Martin Luther King Jr. was promoting his autobiography, Stride Toward Freedom. The atmosphere crackled with the energy of change, and Dr. King was signing copies for a long line of admirers. Suddenly, a woman named Izola Ware Curry approached him. There was a brief exchange, and then a shocking act of violence. Curry lunged at Dr. King, plunging a 7-inch letter opener into his chest. The room erupted in chaos. Thankfully, a bystander reacted swiftly, restraining Curry before further harm could be done. Dr. King, though wounded, remained calm. Rushed to the hospital, surgery revealed the seriousness of the attack. The blade had come dangerously close to a major artery, and a sneeze could have been fatal. Following the attack, Curry was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Reports indicate Curry believed the NAACP, a civil rights organization that Dr. King was associated with, was a communist front persecuting her and preventing her from getting a job. Dr. King, true to his principles of nonviolence, displayed remarkable forgiveness. He publicly expressed his lack of animosity towards Curry. She was never charged with a crime, but instead committed to a mental health facility where she spent most of her remaining years. Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. The air hung heavy with the weight of oppression. The Birmingham campaign, a defiant roar for racial equality, had ignited a firestorm. Local authorities, clinging desperately to segregation, became the dragon guarding a broken system.
You can never whip these birds if you don't keep you and them separate. I found that out in Birmingham. You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
Peaceful protesters, armed only with courage and conviction, took to the streets. Their chants for justice were met with a monstrous response. Police batons rained down, snarling dogs lunged, and fire hoses, wielded like cruel battering rams, unleashed torrents of water. Yet the protesters stood firm, their resolve hardening with each blow. The brutality was a horrifying spectacle. Images beamed across the nation, pierced the conscience of America. A collective gasp resonated from living rooms and newsstands. This wasn't some distant conflict. This was happening here, now. Shame and outrage ignited a groundswell of support. People of all backgrounds awakened to the injustice, stood shoulder to shoulder with the cause. Birmingham became a crucible, the flames of protest forging a new national consciousness. Dr. King's voice resonated far and wide. It spoke to the yearning for equality, a dream deeply embedded in the American ideal. The Birmingham campaign wasn't just about marches and arrests. It was a turning point. It secured victories. Segregated lunch counters became a relic of the past, and landmark civil rights legislation was enacted. More importantly, it showcased the power of nonviolent resistance. The world witnessed the courage of those who stood up to oppression, a testament to the enduring human spirit that refuses to be silenced. Birmingham became a symbol, a reminder that the fight for justice, however daunting, can bring about change.
Freedom Now movement, hear me. We are requesting all citizens to move into Washington, to go by plane, by car, bus, any way that you can get there. Walk if necessary. We are pushing for jobs, housing, desegregated schools. This is an urgent request. Please join. Go to Washington.
The summer of 1963 shimmered with anticipation. In Washington, D.C., a tidal wave of humanity surged towards the Lincoln Memorial. Hundreds of thousands strong, black and white, young and old, they converged for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Led by Dr. King and a chorus of civil rights giants, this wasn't just a march. It was a roar for justice echoing across the nation. Segregation choked the South, and discrimination poisoned opportunity everywhere. The marchers demanded a change, their voices thundering for jobs, freedom, and a simple truth: equality for all. Here, beneath the watchful gaze of Lincoln, etched in stone, Dr. King stepped forward. His words, woven with hope and history, soared into the sweltering air.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
The speech wasn't a plea, it was a prophecy, a vision of a future America where skin color wouldn't be a barrier, but a beautiful part of the tapestry. Millions listened, hearts swelling with a newfound belief that change, however distant, was possible. The March on Washington wasn't just a day, it was a declaration, a turning point in the fight for a more just America. The pressure was mounting. Civil rights protests, particularly the violent clashes in Birmingham, Alabama, had thrust the issue onto the front page of every newspaper and into every living room across America. President Kennedy, facing a nation divided along racial lines, knew he couldn't stay silent. On June 11, 1963, he addressed the nation in a televised speech, his voice crackling through the airwaves.
We have a right to expect that the Negro community will be responsible, will uphold the law, but they have a right to expect that the law will be fair, that the Constitution will be colorblind, as Justice Harlan said at the turn of the century. This is what we're talking about, and this is a matter which concerns this country and what it stands for. And in meeting it, I ask the support of all of our citizens. Thank you very much.
The message was clear. Segregation, a stain on the American conscience, had to end. It wasn't just a moral imperative, it was a national security risk, a symbol of hypocrisy America couldn't afford on the world stage. But words alone wouldn't suffice. President Kennedy called for action, urging Congress to pass a comprehensive civil rights bill. It wouldn't be easy. He knew powerful forces resisted change, clinging to the status quo. Yet, he pressed on, his voice a glimmer of hope in a storm of racial tension. The speech was a turning point, a declaration that the federal government would no longer stand idly by. It was a call to action, not just for politicians in Washington, but for every American to confront the issue of race and work towards a more just and equitable society. However, the civil rights movement wasn't a victory lap. It was a marathon with frustratingly slow pacing. Civil rights leaders and their allies in the White House, like President Kennedy, pushed for change, but progress felt glacial. Sure, Kennedy signed an executive order to ban housing discrimination funded by the federal government, a step in the right direction. But for many, it wasn't enough. Segregation remained a stubborn weed, deeply rooted in the South and casting a long shadow across the nation. November 22, 1963, a day etched in infamy. The nation, still reeling from the violence in Birmingham, was struck by another blow. President Kennedy was assassinated. Shock rippled across the country, a wave of grief washing over everyone. The future of the movement, so precariously balanced on the promise Kennedy embodied, seemed to teeter on the edge of a precipice. Lyndon B. Johnson, a shrewd politician from Texas, took the reins. He inherited not just a nation in mourning, but a movement yearning for progress. Pressure mounted. Would Johnson, with his own political agenda, continue the fight for equality? The answer remained shrouded in uncertainty. The fight for equal rights for all continued, fueled by a growing impatience with the pace of change. The humid Alabama air hung heavy in Selma in 1965. Hope, like the Spanish moss clinging to the ancient oaks, clung precariously to the hearts of Black citizens. Denied their basic right to vote, they faced intimidation and violence every time they approached the registration office. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called for a march, a testament to their resilience, a long walk from Selma to Montgomery, the state capital. 54 miles stretched before them, a dusty path paved with determination. The first Sunday, a day etched in history as Bloody Sunday, dawned bright but turned chilling. As the peaceful throng, singing hymns and carrying signs of equality, crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, a wall of violence erupted. State troopers, like rabid dogs unleashed, rained down tear gas and billy clubs on the unarmed crowd. Images of the brutality, broadcasted nationwide, ripped the veil off the South's ugly truth. Public outrage following the brutality of Bloody Sunday put immense pressure on President Johnson. He responded by deploying federal troops to protect the marchers on their subsequent attempts, ensuring their safety and allowing them to complete their walk to Montgomery. Yet amidst the despair, a flicker of hope emerged. Johnson, a man known for his political maneuvering, surprised many. He pledged to honor Kennedy's legacy and push forward with the Civil Rights Bill. Was it a genuine commitment or a political strategy? Only time would tell, but for a movement on the brink of despair, it was a lifeline. The nation, united in grief, rallied behind Johnson. The fight for civil rights, though dealt a heavy blow, wasn't over. In the face of tragedy, hope, stubborn and unwavering, refused to be extinguished. The dream of equality, though its path had become uncertain, still burned brightly. The tide of the civil rights movement was rising. Victories, hard-fought and long-awaited, began to dot the landscape. Yet beneath the surface, a disquiet stirred. Many felt the pace of change was agonizingly slow. Decades of oppression weren't evaporating overnight. Frustration gnawed at the hearts of some, particularly younger generations, who craved a swifter path to justice. Voices like Malcolm X, with their fiery calls for self-defense and racial pride, resonated deeply with those who questioned the effectiveness of nonviolence. The brutality they faced, the seemingly immovable walls of segregation, fueled a yearning for a more forceful response. This simmering tension boiled over at times. Marches intended to be peaceful erupted in violence. The question loomed large: how to achieve equality when the path diverged? Dr. King, the champion of nonviolence, acknowledged the growing anger. He understood the yearning for immediate change, but he remained resolute in his belief that nonviolence, though demanding immense courage, was the most potent weapon against systemic racism. The fault lines within the movement were undeniable. Dr. King's unwavering commitment to nonviolence stood alongside the growing calls for militancy. The civil rights movement, once seemingly united in its message, now grappled with the complexities of achieving a just and equitable society. In 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his nonviolent resistance to racial injustice and his tireless efforts to achieve civil rights for African Americans in the United States. The Nobel Committee recognized Dr. King's leadership in the civil rights movement and his commitment to promoting peace, equality, and social justice through nonviolent means. At the time of receiving the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, he was the youngest recipient ever chosen by the Nobel Committee. This award wasn't just a personal triumph for Dr. King, it was a validation of the movement's struggle. The world was watching, and the fight for racial equality in America was no longer a domestic issue, it was a global cause. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the balcony in Oslo, Norway, basking in the afterglow of a monumental achievement. The cheers of the crowd echoed in his ears as he clutched the Nobel Peace Prize, a symbol of international recognition for his tireless fight for racial equality. Little did he know, a storm was brewing back home, a storm fueled by hate and veiled in anonymity. Back in the States, a package addressed to Dr. King arrived, seemingly unremarkable. But inside, nestled amongst ordinary mail, lay a serpent, a venomous letter dripping with malice. It wasn't until Dr. King returned, his heart brimming with hope for a more just future, that the letter was discovered. His eyes widened in disbelief as he scanned the vile contents. A yellow, typewritten letter reeked of desperation. Clumsy attempts to correct typos and misspellings marked the page, written in the voice of a betrayed admirer. The recipient, once a respected figure, was now a colossal fraud leading a life of evilness. The letter spewed accusations of sexual orgies and immoral conduct, threatening to expose these filthy acts to the nation within 34 days. There is only one thing left for you to do, the author warns vaguely in the final paragraph. When the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. received this letter, he quietly informed friends that someone wanted him to kill himself, and he thought he knew who that someone was. Despite its half-baked prose, self-conscious amateurism, and other attempts at misdirection, King was certain the letter had come from the FBI. Its infamous director, J. Edgar Hoover, made no secret of his desire to see King discredited. It started when King's alleged communist advisor, Stanley Levison, triggered FBI surveillance in 1961. Despite White House pressure to distance himself from Levison, King continued the association. This, along with King's criticism of the FBI's handling of civil rights issues, further strained relations. J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI's director for what felt like an eternity, ruled his bureau like a pharaoh. He saw himself as the sole guardian of American security, a role he took with an iron fist and a suspicious eye. The rise of Martin Luther King Jr. sent shivers down Hoover's spine. Here was a man with a booming voice, preaching equality and gathering a groundswell of support. Hoover couldn't understand it. In Hoover's world, dissent was communism, and Dr. King's message, with its calls for change, reeked of a communist plot. Hoover, a man who thrived on control, couldn't fathom the effectiveness of Dr. King's nonviolent resistance. He saw it as weakness, not a strategic act of defiance. Here was a man challenging the very order Hoover held dear, and worse, doing it with a charisma that threatened to steal the spotlight. Hoover couldn't tolerate that. This suspicion curdled into a dangerous obsession. Hoover, used to pulling the strings from the shadows, couldn't handle a leader he couldn't control. So, he did what Hoover did best. He weaponized the FBI. Operation COINTELPRO, a program as twisted as it was secretive, became Hoover's tool to undermine Dr. King. Imagine bugs burrowing like malevolent insects into the walls of Dr. King's hotel rooms. Every word, Every strategy session, every whispered dream was captured, analyzed, and used as ammunition. COINTELPRO's tentacles slithered into the civil rights movement. The FBI employed a repugnant arsenal of tactics against Dr. King. They tapped his phones, spreading rumors about his personal life to sow discord within the movement and damage his reputation. They anonymously sent inflammatory letters, attempting to pit civil rights leaders against each other. Their aim was to disrupt, dismantle, and ultimately silence the movement's most powerful voice. It was a psychological warfare waged in the quietest corners. The FBI sought to manipulate the media to tarnish Dr. King's reputation and undermine public support for the civil rights movement. Through covert tactics, the FBI planted false stories, leaked damaging information, and pressured journalists to publish negative articles about King. These efforts aimed to portray King as a radical and discredit his leadership. This orchestrated campaign of disinformation contributed to the delegitimization of King and undermined the effectiveness of the civil rights movement in certain circles.
Yes, I have been threatened many times. There was a time that we received as many as 30 and 40 threatening calls a day. And of course, I received numerous threatening letters. My secretary has come to the point now that she doesn't show me most of these letters, but occasionally I come across them. Within the last few days, I remember receiving a threatening letter, and they say such things as this, you are causing too much trouble in this town, and if you aren't out within 10 days, you and your family will be killed.
Dr. King, ever the champion of nonviolence, marched on. His powerful speeches, his unwavering commitment to justice, resonated far beyond the reach of hidden microphones. The dream of equality, though threatened by the shadows, refused to be extinguished. The fight for civil rights became a battle not just against segregation, but against the forces that sought to suppress dissent in the name of national security. Civil rights weren't the only battle Dr. King fought. As the Vietnam War escalated, his voice rose in thunderous dissent. He saw the war as a monstrous injustice, a sinkhole swallowing resources desperately needed for the fight for equality at home.
Those soldiers will die in Vietnam. Sometime they'll come back home to be buried in Wetumpka, Alabama, and can't even be buried there. It's time to set our own house in order. Others can do what they want to do. That's their business. If other civil rights leaders, for various reasons, refuse or can't take a stand or have to go along with the administration, that's their business. But I'm afraid that I know that justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
His condemnation, fierce and prophetic, resonated with many, but also caused friction. The movement, once seemingly united, began to show cracks. Dr. King's unwavering commitment to nonviolence clashed with the growing anger of some activists towards the government's war machine. Yet, through the rising tensions, Dr. King remained a lighthouse in a storm. The waves of harassment and intimidation crashed against him, but his unwavering commitment to peace and justice shone ever brighter. New challenges may have emerged, but they never extinguished the flame of his determination. Memphis, Tennessee. The year is 1968. The fight for civil rights in America continues to rage. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a powerful voice for equality, stands with a new group facing injustice: the sanitation workers of Memphis, Tennessee. These men, the backbone of the city's sanitation system, toiled under brutal conditions for meager wages. Many lacked basic safety equipment, and the city offered them little respect. Their breaking point came in February of 1968, when two workers, Echo Cole and Robert Walker, were crushed to death by a malfunctioning garbage truck. In the wake of this tragedy, over 1,100 sanitation workers walked off the job, demanding better pay, safer working conditions, and recognition of their union. Their slogan, "I am a man," resonated across America, a simple yet powerful declaration of their dignity and worth. Dr. King, deeply moved by their plight, decided to lend his voice to their cause. He arrived in Memphis in late March, determined to support the workers and bring national attention to their struggle. However, the path to progress was not smooth. The strike faced fierce opposition from Memphis city officials and some white residents. Tensions rose and violence erupted during some protests. Dr. King himself became a target, receiving threats and facing a growing sense of danger. Despite the risks, Dr. King remained committed to the cause. He planned a large march for April 8, 1968, hoping to pressure the city into a fair agreement. Tragically, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would never lead that march. On the evening of April 4, 1968, while standing on the balcony of his motel room, he was assassinated. The Memphis sanitation workers' strike, though marred by Dr. King's assassination, ultimately achieved a victory. Weeks later, after continued protests and public pressure, the city agreed to the workers' demands, recognizing their union and improving their working conditions. Dr. King's support for the Memphis sanitation workers became a testament to his belief in the fight for economic justice alongside racial equality. The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. remains a deeply emotional event. The sudden silencing of such a powerful voice for racial equality fueled a wave of conspiracy theories that continue to linger today. This theory suggests that U.S. government agencies, like the FBI or CIA, were somehow involved in Dr. King's assassination. Proponents point to the FBI's extensive surveillance of Dr. King and the documented efforts to discredit him through COINTELPRO, a program aimed at disrupting dissident groups. They argue that Dr. King's growing influence and his criticism of the Vietnam War posed a threat to the government, making him a target for elimination. However, the FBI's surveillance of Dr. King is well documented, but there's no evidence of a direct link to the assassination. This theory posits that white supremacist organizations, particularly the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, were responsible for Dr. King's death. The KKK and other such groups vehemently opposed the civil rights movement. By 1968, Dr. King had become a global icon for racial equality. His message of nonviolence and his ability to mobilize large numbers of people were seen as a direct threat to the status quo and the interests of white supremacist groups. Some believed that eliminating Dr. King would disrupt the civil rights movement and slow down progress. Sources say that the KKK did operate in Memphis at the time, but there's no concrete evidence linking them to the crime. James Earl Ray, the convicted assassin, wasn't directly affiliated with any known white supremacist groups. This theory questions the official narrative of James Earl Ray acting alone. Some argue that Ray, a career criminal with limited resources, lacked the planning and resources to pull off such a complex assassination. They believe he may have been manipulated or hired by a larger conspiracy, with Ray himself serving as a convenient scapegoat. While these conspiracy theories remain unsubstantiated by hard evidence, they highlight the public's desire for a complete understanding of Dr. King's assassination. The unresolved questions surrounding his death and the magnitude of his life's work continue to fuel speculation. As the years have passed since the tragic assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on that fateful April day in 1968, his legacy has endured as a symbol of hope and inspiration for generations. Dr. King's tireless advocacy for racial equality, his unwavering commitment to nonviolent resistance, and his powerful calls for justice continue to resonate deeply in the hearts and minds of people around the world. Yet, despite the progress that has been made in the decades since Dr. King's death, the fight for racial equality in America remains far from over. While landmark legislation such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 have dismantled many of the legal barriers to equality, systemic racism and institutionalized discrimination persist in various forms. Today, the struggle for racial justice takes on new dimensions as activists and advocates confront issues such as police brutality, mass incarceration, economic inequality, and educational disparities. The deaths of unarmed black individuals at the hands of law enforcement officers, the disproportionate impact of the criminal justice system on communities of color, and the persistent racial wealth gap serve as stark reminders of the unfinished work that lies ahead. In the face of these challenges, Dr. King's legacy continues to inspire a new generation of activists and advocates to take up the mantle of the civil rights movement. The Black Lives Matter movement, sparked by the deaths of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and countless others, has galvanized millions of people to speak out against racial injustice and demand accountability from those in power. Protesters take to the streets, march in solidarity, and raise their voices in unison, echoing Dr. King's call for freedom, justice, and equality for all. As we reflect on Dr. King's enduring legacy and the ongoing fight for racial equality in America, we are reminded that the struggle is not merely a historical artifact, but a living, breathing reality that demands our attention and our action. Dr. King's dream of a beloved community where all people are treated with dignity and respect remains as relevant today as it was during the height of the civil rights movement.
We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Hey, keep order, keep order.
If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl, but by all means, keep moving.